Welcome to Tomorrow's People, the podcast brought to you by Personio and me, Perry Timms. Everything starts with people, and everything people do today and tomorrow needs some learning, which is why we explored this together with Andy Lancaster, Head of Learning at CIPD, author and leading light on what the future holds for tomorrow's people from a learning perspective. Welcome to Tomorrow's People podcast, Andy Lancaster. Great to have you here.
Fantastic to be here, Perry.
There's so much we could talk about that I suspect we could have a whole series of these, but I know there are some things that are really kind of firing you up at the moment and are really capturing your attention, one of which we'll talk about is going to culminate in a written piece of work, a new book for you. But let's talk about what is really kind of floating your boat at the moment and really capturing your attention. What's that?
So obviously in leading learning at CIPD, there's a broader piece around learning professionals and where we're going. But I think for me, what's really captured my attention since the first book from Driving Performance Through Learning is this real challenge and opportunity equally about how do we move learning into the flow of work. We're all talking about this, but it's quite challenging to do that. We have a huge history, a huge legacy of certain ways of doing things. So I guess the first book was really, I guess I wrote these for me, Perry. Why on earth would you go through the pain of writing a book? Well, in the case of the first one and the one I'm currently working on, which will be out in 2024, I've written them for myself because I've got my own challenges around thinking on this one. So the thing which is grabbing my attention right now is about connectivity. How do we really excel at working together on performance and particularly around connected communities, collaborative learning? It's a phrase which has been out there for so long, but most of us who have tried to do this recognise that there's some challenges around it. So at the minute, doing some heavy lifting, some around the research around this, but really trying to come up with some pragmatic things that Andy Lancaster can apply in my situation. And if that's of any value to anybody else, then so be it.
And I think you're hitting on something with the connectivity piece, because we could say we're more connected than ever, right? With devices and instant messaging and so on. However, that feels like a thin thread, doesn't it? And what you're, I think, starting to want to pull a thicker thread on is deeper, more powerful and more moving, perhaps, connectivity. And I know you're looking at how we do that in groups, in teams, in social, communal and operational environments, I guess. So happy to hear a little bit more about where you're going with that.
So about 2 years ago, it captured my attention on holiday.
Right.
Often the best stuff happens when you stop. We were at breakfast. We were abroad at breakfast, and we spotted this row of ants. My son and I. So Aidan's in his 20s, so he's not young. We spotted this row of ants. We watched these things carrying food, obviously back to the nest. And we just tracked along the thing, and you could see the movement, the passing ants, the information was going. Obviously, we didn't have a microscope there, so you couldn't spot the feeling, but quite clearly they were working as a single unit to benefit the nest. So I kind of came out, it kind of stimulated my thinking. I've been around social learning for some time, but it really got me thinking that in the natural world, this is such an obvious and innate way of doing things. So if you look at it, there are so many examples, and we know this through nature. But you look, hermit crabs can fix problems in shell sizes. Bees, obviously the classic example. You think of a murmuration of thousands of birds working together, and the movements are all choreographed around interdependencies, those kind of things. So it just got me thinking, if in the natural world this is how you do performance and even survival, then we need to get a lot smarter. And I think for me, owning it myself, I think often we overplay independence in our world. It's about me, how I'm doing, my profile. And I think we've lost something around interdependence. So the starting place for this one is, I think we've got a shift in organisations to think about interdependence is so crucial for so many reasons.
Like the world shrunken to my world, when actually what you're saying is that's not a natural state to be in because of the connectivity to all the systems and influences and so on around you. And I know for a fact that when I think about some of the learning environments that I've thrived in, there's been an enormous amount of generosity and I guess you'd say almost like gifting going on there, with people going, I know this, I'm going to help you, I'm not going to take it away from you. mentoring, that kind of thing. So you're right, it pops up in many guises, doesn't it? But it perhaps feels a little bit fragmented, and therefore maybe it is underutilized in the world of work.
Yeah. And where did we meet? Through Twitter in the early days, when it was rocking in the early days, and we made connections, a whole bunch of us. I remember rocking up in a cellar in a college in London, where a bunch of people who hung around at that time on social media gathered together. So there's no doubt that those connections are so important. But this kind of me stuff, I guess when I've done the best, Perry, when things have really rocked, when we've done well in organisations, it's when we've been in a group that are just connected, values, altruism, all those kind of things are together. So I think the thrust of the book is how do we really think systemically about how we do that? Sure, serendipity, this happens from time to time. It absolutely does. And I'm in a few groups like that. But I think from an organisation point of view, we've got to think this through a little bit more about how connectivity drives performance.
And I'm guessing some of the worlds of work is now trying to grapple with this in terms of the absolutely overhyped, but nonetheless we understand it, return to office type of debate and discussion. And where people are resisting, they're going, I'm not going to come in and spend my time through a screen. I can do that from anywhere. But if you're telling me I can be with people and we can do creative things and solve problems, maybe there's a meeting of both that and what you're unearthing through this as a massively purposeful reason to get people together to do that kind of thing. So it's almost like we're rediscovering older traditions, perhaps. And I know you're looking at guilds as one example.
Yeah, so just over a year ago, I spoke at a venue in London, tucked away behind Southwark Cathedral, at the Worshipful Company of Launderers, which is just absolutely wonderful. So again, sometimes you just have to stop and just assimilate where you are and what this means. And I suddenly realised actually there's a worshipful company of people involved with laundry.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So doing a bit of thinking around that, there are so many guilds. Obviously, if you're outside the UK listening to this, in the UK, we have things called livery companies. So these were guilds who gather together to think about how to be brilliant in your particular profession.
Yeah.
And if you take things, there's a whole bunch of them. Cutlers who make cutlery, saddlers, plumbers, fruiterers. Yeah. There's even tax advisors, which is a recent one. So, if you look historically on this, there has been a real value in gathering as a guild, and that term is interesting. That's beginning to go in our organisational language and thinking. Yeah. So, in looking at that, clearly the history, and if you look at guilds. Yeah. They were very focused on performance, but equally on innovation as well. Yeah. So if you take stonemasonry, the Worshipful Company of Masons gained their royal charter in 1677, an important date because it was just after the Great Fire of London. Uh-huh. So London is razed to the ground. We've got to think about how we're going to rebuild this thing. How do you do this with quality? Because there was a concern that we don't want to just put loads of stuff up again that's going to burn to the ground. So again, it was through the Guild of Stonemasons that the thing was brought back. And I mean, maybe for some listening in on this, you might be in situations actually where you're amongst the rebel right now. Well, the lesson there was it was through a guild of people committed to excellence, committed to problem solving, to innovation, which restored London. And those guilds exist to these days. So I think, and I work, in a professional organisation, which again is a networking organisation. That was the root of it. Yeah. So I think for me, Perry, I think there's something we've got to recapture around guild, around connectivity as the means for all manner of things, but innovation and productivity and excellence are really linked to being together.
And they feel like quite noble callings and causes, don't they? And I mean, I guess when I'm thinking to my past history recently in communities, there's often been an interest and maybe a sort of a topic, but did it have enough of a cause? Probably not, which is why they dissipated and disappeared, perhaps. Yeah. So cause feels quite important.
I mean, if we go to Etienne Wenger's work around domains, I think there is a gathering point, and I think this is one of the reasons why we're struggling in organisations to perhaps realise the full potential around connectivity, because it is that pull that brings us together. So I think back how you and I first connected, there was a pull around modern workplace learning, around organisations of the future, that kind of stuff. That's what connects. That's why I'm sitting here with you today, because that shared cause. So I think within organisations, they're clearly, and this is beyond the organisational structure, often this sits outside hierarchy. This is about passionate people who can see the world, can see where it could go, and through those interconnections can really make a difference. So I think for me, there's a number of factors around this, but it doesn't half make a difference sitting in a small podcast studio with someone who you're passionate about the topic with. That's where the energy comes from.
And I guess we might be thinking in a modern sense, why would you need guilds? Because, we've got transient careers and all sorts of things. But we are now starting to see some kind of hyper specialisms come through, right? And I think there's also something about the collective nature of people coming together to learn, because you can create versatility perhaps within that, things that are adjacent to what you know that others know that you can imbue and put into practice. And it almost begs the question, like, why doesn't this happen more naturally within perhaps work environments? Do you think it's because we've got too much stratification and focus on P&L and we're all distracted by things? Or is there genuinely a reason why you think we've kind of gone a bit fragmented when it comes to work?
Yeah. And I get to hang around lots of organisations by nature of my role. I think sometimes we've become far too reliant on the system to deliver this stuff. Right. So I, my first degree was in design with education. So I'm a designer by background. Mm-hmm. So, which is pertinent to this actually. My main electives were in furniture design, silversmithing.
Wow.
So I come from that design background. I remember hanging around with brilliant professors, absolutely brilliant people, looking at innovation. And invariably, it was adjacent thinking. That's where it comes. Occasionally, you come up with an absolutely brilliant new novel thing. But for most people, it's the combination of things. That's where innovation comes from. Yeah. So we cannot rely on the organisational system to deliver that. So the more we network, the more we're connected. That's where those brilliant ideas come from. And I think the gestation of ideas, and if we want to talk about our own organisations here, this networking stuff is where it happens.
Yeah. And there's something, isn't there, about, like you say, stepping out of a particular frame of reference into something else. And people go, wow, that's got nothing to do with what I do. You're more likely to be in receipt of something that you would never have done otherwise. Like, why benchmark with people like you? Benchmark with people completely different to you. And then there's something about synthesis, would you say? You almost take it in and you kind of go, I can't just cut and paste this. I've got to morph, adapt, test, experiment. And do you think communities are a place where experimentation particularly is a safer thing to do?
Yeah, I do. I mean, in the book, so in doing the heavy lifting around this, and that I think that's part of the job of an author as well.
Yeah.
For busy people, if we're passionate about this, and joking aside, getting up very early in the morning to write this stuff and whatever, we need to do the thinking around this. So there is no doubt. So for me, there's a number of things, but I've got 5 things which I think are supercharged by communities. So without doubt, development is one of those. If we want to develop ourselves, it's a lonely place trying to become better just on your own. So being in a community is definitely one for there. Knowledge sharing is a really clear one for me. And for some reason, I don't know how we've done it, we've almost got into thinking about platforms for knowledge sharing. There's that whole thing, it's the platform. And crazy thing is, the platform often sat with the IT team, not with the people team. So if we're really serious about knowledge sharing comes through people, not through platforms. We've already talked about guilds. If you want to get better at what you want to do, if you want to innovate, that's a community-based activity for me. So problem solving is another one. We could delve into that perhaps. But again, solving problems is proven to be better with connectivity and also innovation around that. Right. So those are my 5 ones. This is why all of us need to get better at connecting. If we're serious about performance, development, knowledge sharing, practice, problems, innovation, all of those things for me now are much better when we're connected. And it's a lonely place. Some listening on the podcast, I've been in a singleton team in previous organisations. It's a lonely place to be. So therefore, the more we seek out like-minded, passionate people who can spur us on, the better, I think.
And what I'm hearing there, if I've got my learning and development professional head on, is I'm hearing a shift from creating content, indexing content, using AI to present content to people, to almost like a renaissance of human-to-human exchange at scale with a very clear reason for being, but lots of open-mindedness about what goes on within that. And you touched on something really crucial in there, and I want to pick that thread because you sort of laid it out anyway, the problem-solving thing.
Yep.
I genuinely think learning to not solve a problem is almost like kind of what's the point? You can learn something and not quite know what problem you're solving, but you are always learning to eventually use it to solve a problem. It's almost my take on it.
Yeah, and there's been a huge and rightful push towards alignment. You go to any conference now, how does learning get better? Well, we've got to align to organizational. We know that one. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But how powerful when particularly, problem solving innovation is what we're on here. And I think it's interesting in the context of AI, the number of times I see the word artisan appearing now in culture. Hang around on a station. I used to buy a sandwich, but now I've got an artisan bakery. Now I know where they're going with this one, but there is something very profound when you get bunches of artisans together who really know. And if you think about problem solving innovation, you can know the basic steps of how to do stuff, but artisans are able to have that chemistry where they can innovate and problem solve, those kind of things. So I think absolutely for organizational learning, we have to be in a place, if we're serious, and this podcast is all about performance. If we're serious about this, it is about problems, it is about supporting people in the moment of need, it is about innovation. And everything I can see, having done the research around this, is that connectivity is the key. It's a key for this.
Yeah. And that flow of work means you are connected to a purposeful thing to do that you may hit an inhibitor, a barrier, or a lag or something. And then you kind of think, okay, what do I do now? Well, I learn, don't I? I learn my way around it, under it, over it, or whatever. And you don't just do that. You kind of think, hang on a minute, I've learned that. Now there's an obligation for me to go, hey, everybody else, if you come across this, here's how you learn. Now, I remember BT several years ago did some novel things with video. If you fixed a problem out in the field, you videoed yourself doing it and sent it back so that the community could access it. That feels like an altruistic gesture in a way, doesn't it? But that's again connectivity.
Yeah, and it comes back to the knowledge sharing thing again. I know something, and and I think the selfishness that sometimes exists where we hold stuff to ourselves, and maybe for me, there is something of age around this where now altruism is far more important, and I think I wish I'd grasped that perhaps in my 20s. So again, without being ageist here, if there's guys listening here where you're early on in career, just think altruism, because I don't think anybody has ever lost through being altruistic.
Good point.
I think there's risk associated with that of giving stuff away. But I've never lost in that period. I think by being connected, by being generous in spirit, those kind of things. So again, that's how. And if we think about innovation, you think Apple now. My Apple phone just sitting over there. For those watching the video, it's just over there. We tend to think Apple campus, spaceship building, all those kind of things. Apple, how massive it was. It started as the homebrew computer club in a garage. A bunch of people sharing parts, sharing thinking, saying, I don't know how to do this. And from that garage of passionate enthusiasts, the biggest corporations, and we love. And if we say what's the most innovative organisation, we tend to say Apple or organisations like that. It started in a garage with a bunch of people who just loved hanging around together to build computers and bits of stuff. And I remember, I go back to my design thing at university, at Brunel University. When I was there, we unpacked our first Apple Mac the box. We dragged this thing out of the box, and we actually stood back from this thing and just look at this.
I know,
and it came from a bunch of people in a garage. I mean, that's the thing. So I think whether it's problem solving or innovation, I think altruism, connecting. Again, let's keep back at the core of this. If we're serious about performance and productivity, it isn't about singletons. It is about working together within the organisation and with adjacent communities. That's how we drive performance.
And do you think that is potentially a way we can sort of hack our obsession with a curriculum? Because we do in education obviously have a curriculum, but even in the workplace, we seem to want to have a curriculum, a talent program, a leadership program, D&I, inclusivity, whatever it is. We seem to programmatically put learning out there, thinking that's how we get people moving through capability levels. What I'm hearing from you is like we probably need to have a bit of that, but a lot more of what you're talking about, a lot more of this almost serendipitous, energetic, giving-based stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about cause, so we know that communities, and again, Etienne Wenger's work around this, it's been around for some time, and communities of practice, that domain matters. I think what you're rightfully highlighting is often the organisation is the one that sets the domains and the causes. Management development programs. I've done many of them. To my shame on some of them as well. Apologies on the air to those who went through some of my early management. But the organisation comes up with the domains.
Yes.
What I think we're saying here is that there are really important domains that exist. So in the book, I've just been exploring the types of learning communities. Because when you talk learning communities, most people just say communities of practice. That's what we naturally err to. But there's all manner of things. Buddying groups for induction. We see many organisations succeed massively with creating communities for onboarding.
Exactly.
What a brilliant place to allow people who've got the shared experience of joining. All manner of things. So I think the organisation probably has set the agenda structurally on the domain. And I think if we can get to the point where there might be a bunch of people who are interested in a given area of innovation, that's where the community can get together with the blessing of the organisation. I mean, sometimes these are subversive things, and that happens within organisations. But I think the more we embrace joining together like-minded people to really spark on this stuff, that's powerful.
And I guess when you're a small enterprise, you're kind of all in it together anyway. So there's probably cross-pollination, shall we say. And but if you are a specialist in a particular field and you're the only one in a small organisation, belonging to a body, belonging to a local group, and belonging to things that are a bit random perhaps, but still are interesting to you, that's stuff you can bring back, can't you? You could almost like say, hey, I found this, it's useful for me, but it might be for you, logistics person and data person and whatever. Because there is something in that, isn't there?
There is. And I think, we talk about networking, and often, you got to network. You got to network because it's about your career progression. Networking for me is about knowledge assimilation and sparking that kind of thing. So clearly, you might need to be in a professional network in terms of thinking about how your career progresses. But for me, that networking period is priceless stuff. And especially the more we become specialists. For me, hanging around with other interesting, innovative learning professionals and people who challenge my thinking. People who just don't agree with me. I mean, part of being in community, anybody who's been in a community, you think about, family as the base unit of community. We don't agree all the time. So actually having people who are, disruptive, put some sand in the oyster. Let's get a pearl out of this. So it is about hanging in the community with people who challenge your thinking, those kind of things. So absolutely. And as someone who worked as, early career in organisations where I was either singleton or in a very small learning team, it shows how much more that you must be part of a wider community, because that's where your thinking is expanded.
Hey folks, Perry Timms here, host of Tomorrow's People. I have to tell you that I'm loving Personio. It's a game changer for HR. With fantastic features and new updates coming all of the time, it keeps your HR work innovative almost on its own. Check them out at personio.com. That's PERSONIO.com.
And I know you are looking at the concept of cadence as well. And I guess we can talk about rhythm and we can talk about pace, but there feels to me something like a community thrives when there is an energy, there is a stimulus, and perhaps that manifests itself in a cadence, whether that's how regularly you post or get together, jump on calls, throw a problem in the mix or whatever it is. So anything more on cadence that's coming up?
So cadence is an interesting one. Maybe I'll come, so there's a number of areas where cadence is one of those. And it's interesting when again, my naivety, you start doing your research around this. If you put cadence into a search engine, cycling comes up and orchestra comes up. Interesting. So cadence is about rhythm within orchestra. How do you keep a bunch of musicians together, coherent, making a melody, making a good, I was going to say a tune, but that's slightly disparaging, isn't it? So someone who got grade 5 French horn, that was the limit of it. But cadence is what keeps rhythm, is what keeps an orchestra together. And cadence in terms of cycling, those who are real keen cyclists will know it's to do with the rate of pedaling, but more so to do with the right rhythm for the given circumstances. So if you look at cycling teams that are really high performers, cadence is a real study area for them. So I think without doubt, and one of the reasons I guess for the thinking around the book was I think we've got to get more intentional around some of the levers. So we often see communities start really well with a real bang, a lot of buzz, and then it's fizzes away, and then then exactly right, that whistle, it just kind of peters out. So cadence is really important around this one. And most communities that you see, most networks, connectivity, there is some sense of rhythm. We get together however we do that, be that virtually together or whatever. And I think to your point, post-pandemic, I think actually being together for collaboration is really important around that. So there's no doubt that cadence helps a community to rock. I mean, the other ones I've got, I'll just throw them out there for people listening in. I mean, you can grab them in the book. Cause we've already talked about.
Yeah.
So there's a C around cause, around domain, the thing that sticks us together. Culture, we can maybe come on to that one. Culture, psychological safety, trust, altruism, all those kind of things. Yeah. There's a thing around conditions, my third C. So you've got to think about the spaces the spaces really matter. For communities. Cadence, you've got content, dealing with content. It's about really thinking about a curation strategy. How do we bring brilliant content in there? Contributions, how do we move from communities with tons of lurkers to community full of leaders? And there is a real strategy I think we can do around how we bring more contributions in. The last thing is credit, which is what I'm working on at the minute, which is just fascinating that if you look within some communities, tokens, within some tribes, tokens matter. So for me, I've got these 7 C's. This is where we're heading on this, of which cadence is one of them. But these are the levers. If you were driving a community, for me, they're not perhaps the only ones, but you've got 7 levers here, which are really important to manipulate these levers in order to make a community absolutely fizz.
There is a kind of symphony within that, isn't there? When you get the right mix at the right time. So I really like that, and the token thing's really interesting because there is a sense that if we put in a lot to a community, but we don't seem to get much out of it, we'll kind of think, well, I'm doing all the deposits here. Where's my withdrawal? And there is something about that, isn't there? It's almost like you don't do it for that, but that can feel quite, again, lonely and perhaps a bit like, no reciprocation. And we do seem to like that, don't we?
Yeah, well, stumbled on this one. So often we find those who are technical expertise, we get a classic thing, we put them into management roles, we get Peter Principle, people get into a position where they're not effective anymore. How about vibrant communities that people with high levels of technical expertise are valued, promoted, and put in positions where they are the key instigators and the key runner of these communities? So I think a lot of people would love to do that. I think I never had the options to do that. It was always a management route for me, Whereas you think, actually, if you could be in a vibrant community, a bunch of people, and actually the technical experts who drive performance, these are the ones they go. I think back my last organisation, there was a go-to person for pivot tables on Excel. You knew who to go to if you wanted to perform on that one. So valuing these people in communities, within organisations or wider, it's just a powerful way of saying, skill, competency matters, and we can value that within a community setting.
And I'm seeing a connection to what you're doing in setting out the power in community-based approaches here to something that I know lots of people, professionals, struggle with. The whole concept of a strategic workforce plan and a kind of a talent mapping sort of exercise, because it's almost like if you can set all these communities off in motion with the right kind of frame around it, there's harvesting to come from that, isn't there? There's aggregation, there's assimilation, like you said earlier on. It's almost like the natural phenomena takes over, right?
Yeah, and I think you raised a really important point there around who owns community. There are big philosophical debates around this one. Big philosophical debates. And some of the best communities I've been have been quite subversive. They're under the radar, and they exist. And I think, without in any way undermining leadership, I think subversion within community, that's really important. That's often where the really edgy stuff is happening. But for me, within there are some valid reasons why an organisation would use in its talent strategy or whatever to have communities as part of that. And for me, they're often where there's quality or where there's risk or there's scalability, resourcing, those kind of things. So I think sometimes it's absolutely right for the organisation to drive this. And I think community should be seen. I mean, for me, going back to what you said a minute ago, content courses, those kind of things have been so important to us. If only we could elevate connected, collaborative communities alongside our traditional ways of doing it, I think we would be onto an absolute winner, which is why passionate about this book, because this is such a vital tool for us as learning professionals, as people professionals, as to how we do this. But I think equally you've got structure, but we need serendipity here. So we need some communities here which, are more personally focused. Maybe they're not huge scale. They're not dealing with huge areas of risk or quality or whatever. Those communities, we should equip people in organizations to be able to network and be in these groups. If it's good for you, I think about one organization I was in. It was non-related to work, but there was a group that kind of hung together around parenting skills. Nothing to do with work, but boy, did that help them in terms of their holistic well-being and all this kind of thing. Absolutely. So there's even room that, for me, community actually supports well-being, wider stuff that we connect with people, which helps us with the day job. So all of this fantastic networking and a lot of this stuff goes on under the radar. We know it exists. So, one thing I get asked often is, where do you start with this? Well, I think you go and actually have a mooch around and just see what is going on, because a lot of these communities are already there and we don't kind of walk all over them like, you walk into someone's party and take it over. But I think we'd be surprised in most organizations exactly what connectivity is going on, and let's fan the flames of great collaboration, which is happening.
It kind of feels like you would then reverse cliqueism that sometimes comes, where people almost withdraw into a clique because they want to be a little bit exclusive. And I like the fact that if you can surface them in a way which is not to, impurify them, it's to say there's value here and we want to back it. And I think ERGs, or employee representative groups, are a manifestation perhaps of where the organisation is perhaps trying to create some space for people to do that. And I think there's absolutely nothing wrong in saying an ERG is not a lobby group internally per se, it's a learning space. And it is that I don't really know what to do about this instance that's just occurred to me. And people go, well, I'll help you and I'll help you learn. So I think there's something really powerful in the organisation just saying, here's the space, fill it.
Yeah. And I remember, my last organisation before being at CIPD, we did a skills audit. We were shocked at what skills existed under the lid. People have no idea looking at me, furniture design and silversmith.
Exactly.
Still in my shed making stuff right now. Christmas projects have started. So those listening to this, we're hanging around in August, but people don't realise what we've got here, and often it's through that wonderful relational connection that people then begin to realise the depth, what I'm carrying here, what I bring to the table. It's not my current role. And that's where the altruism kicks in. I've done that. I've been around. I've got connections in that one. I can introduce it to someone. So again, sometimes we look at people with very narrow lenses in terms of what their current role is, rather than saying you have so much potential here for supporting performance in the organisation.
Very nice. And I think all of this is leading me to another C word, which is craft, because it feels like work has become this thing that is both passionate but also tolerated and can at times be frustrating, commoditized and so on. But when we think about craft, love that we put into it and a higher sense of good for something, and you being a furniture maker and a silversmith obviously is an example of that, some magic happens to us when we feel like we're craftful, would you say?
Yeah, it's creativity, isn't it? You know, I think we all absolutely have creativity at the core. Somehow we lose that from childhood. We don't seem to worry about creativity in childhood. It just happens there, but somehow it gets drummed out of us, doesn't it? But yeah, the creative side. And again, for me, creativity inherently happens in spaces together. That's where fantastic creative, thinking happens. I mean, that great thing from, I've got it around the problem solving. That great thing from Apollo 13. You've got CO2 going up in the capsule up there. They're struggling. Life is. What do you do? How do we do this? Well, we've got a bunch of creative people here, and we throw a load of rubbish on a table. Before we know it, we've got a CO2 filter.
Wow.
So creativity for me is this is what we can do. This stuff, but I often, I need people around me to spark and so craft is definitely in there. Nice. Creativity is without doubt is much stronger in a connected setting.
There's a symbiosis, isn't there, between creativity and learning, because by being creative you learn, and you can learn how to be more creative and so on and so forth, right?
Cyclical, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with all that in mind, I think there's a call here, isn't there, to value community, social, and everything that emanates from that as part of the sort of learning development strategy. But I elevate it even more to like the philosophy of how you want to be. So I'm loving the call for people to sort of detach a bit from programmatic to being that part of, but the bigger sense of community and sharing and so on, and strengthening relationships and bonds and binds and causes and all that kind of stuff comes from it. Anything else you'd like to share or bring into the conversation at the moment, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'd just throw in, I think trust and psychological safety are big factors in this, without a shadow of doubt. So again, the fact that we've known each other over time, you build relationships, you can actually test things out. It's very challenging to test out crazy ideas or to be vulnerable about issues that you're dealing with if there isn't that psychological safety. So I think one of the core things, there are some key underpinning things here, and we generally work these things out together. But I think if we're serious about this in organisations, we need to really think through, around psychological safety. I found a brilliant quote from Brené Brown. I just noted it down here. It's just fantastic. Our job is to look and say, you know what, you're imperfect and you're wired for struggle, but you're worthy of belonging.
Yeah.
So for me, that's how it works with community, isn't it? You look at someone else, you look at yourself and you think, actually, we've got problems around here, but there is a safe space here where you can be yourself with everything you bring, good and struggle, and you belong here. So I think the psychological safety is really, and I think it's about allowing people to be, this is where the performance goes, this is where the creativity, this is where the innovation goes. When we can be our authentic self, we've got room to grow, we can create value. So I think without doubt, it's more difficult to do this where there isn't psychological safety. But I think for me, if you're in a situation where there may be challenges around trust, psychological safety, you can actually build a biome of psychological safety within an organisation. You can build an environment where you can model this, even if I
know what you mean.
The wider thing. So be encouraged. If you're listening in on this one and you've got challenges around this, it is totally possible to build a small group with that connection, that safety, which actually drives performance. And sometimes maybe that becomes the DNA to be planted elsewhere. So I love. Again, those outside the UK, we've got the Eden Project, where you've got these biomes where you can create slightly different cultures. Look at using community and connection to create those powerful cultures where we can do this kind of thing.
I was thinking that a kind of a positive mutation and a sort of antibody collection that helps purify what is potentially quite toxic on the outside. And maybe there's a secret there if people are thinking, but I'm in an organisation that doesn't value learning, doesn't want to do this. It's almost like, but there are people who will find them, create that little almost enclave. And then before you know it, you've probably got a guild on your hands when it shows its value, which it will do, won't it?
Yeah, and sometimes I think, it does help on some of these, if we're really going to turn the dial on this, to have organisational sponsors. But most organisations will be very comfortable about people connecting together around this. So I think, absolutely. I think it's finding, so it starts with cause for me. You connect with people for whatever it is. It's a similar challenge, a similar opportunity. It's something you're passionate about. That's where we drive performance. If we've got all these little units focusing on excellence, innovation, all these problem solving things, that's where it comes. So I'm very much with you. I think this is not to say we shouldn't have great content. No. We're swimming in content. We shouldn't have great content. We should be using AI to really well, in fact, content is really key. It's one of my C's for you've got to seed a community with content. So with AI now, we can really hone that in. We clearly need courses and those kind of things, but for me, we need to elevate it. This is about elevating collaboration and connection. For me, organizational collaborative learning communities like this, this is a hot topic. I'm going to, I'm on this one now. I just know it is. It's and it's a cost-effective, powerful way of developing people and driving organisational performance.
Love it. And within that, I guess, is a sort of final thought from me, which is about the fact that we're in a very paradoxical world where actually things aren't always polar opposite. They're ands. They're ands. Nice. And what you're describing is almost like, let's informalise what we can then turn into formal value. I mean, I think there's something lovely about that. And if we are thinking to ourselves, it sounds a bit chaotic. It's like, well, give it a go and you'll see how it shapes. Like you say, the murmuration and the ant colony and all that, they make it work work all the time in chaotic circumstances.
Well, I mean, maybe we finish off where we started with that murmuration.
Yeah.
It looks like a chaotic mess. Thousands, you've probably seen it, a black cloud, thousands of birds seemingly pulsating, moving together. It looks like a crazy, unorchestrated mess. But we know within that messy cloud, there's information given about where nesting sites are. There's information about where to find food. There's information about how together we can manage risk. That big, powerful thing, for the predator comes in. So there's so many things. So maybe part of our skill is out of this, what appears to be a bit of a messy thing. The communication is so powerful around so many things. So maybe we go back to in the natural world, this is the way it's done. Without thinking, I haven't been on a seminar on this.
No.
This is the natural tendency that we do this stuff together. And I think maybe it's time, most people will know this kind of stuff, but maybe it's time just to step back, reflect, and recognize that the analogies we can draw from nature are just a key for organizational performance.
Love it. And we'll leave us on that note of teaming. So thank you, Andy Lancaster. It's been a pleasure. And good luck with the rest of the writing. And by the time this is published, we hope it's out there and we'll put some links on. But
thanks, Perry. So the working title is Organisational Learning Communities, Empowering Social Learning and Collaboration to Improve Performance. So, so it's a work in progress at the minute. But and if people want to connect on LinkedIn, listening in on this one, we're part of a community here as well. So I sent some references out this week, someone who connected with me. So very happy to connect with you. And thanks, Perry, it's a great podcast series, and it's just a privilege and pleasure to be part of it.
Same. Thanks, Andy. If you've enjoyed this episode of Tomorrow's People, please subscribe and check out our previous episodes from wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you want to transform your people processes, head to personio.com.